Think about here's my most cynical interpretation of what's going on now. It might not be totally true, but I'm just going to reveal what the premonition is. I hope it's not true because it would be pretty disastrous. But they're deliberately crashing the economy at this point. Look, I mean, tariffs have a sound argument behind them, maybe to some extent. Maybe it's viable to say that the United States has to incur what they call short-term pain if they want to restructure the global trade order or revitalize manufacturing in the long term. Okay, but nonetheless, they're crashing the economy at the moment on like ideological grounds. They're doing about preemptive strikes on the expression of speech. You know, basically abducting people and throwing them into vans because they have written a very mild op-ed about Israel. They're shredding due process and opening up dungeons in El Salvador after Hegseth couldn't get it done with Guantanamo. And they're very sprawlingly dictating terms to college campuses, which would be the locus of protest most likely in the event that a big war really does break out in the Middle East, by kind of preemptively requiring them to stifle speech. And then Trump is saying by like the middle or end of May, Iran's going to be bombed if it does not comply with our maximalist demands for them to dismantle the nuclear program that they claim is not even weaponizable. And actually, oh, by the way, the National Threat Assessment, or the annual threat assessment that the DNI's office does under Tulsi Gabbard, says that Iran is not acquiring a nuclear weapon, but like that doesn't factor into the public rhetoric. So I guess my most cynical interpretation of what's going on now is, look, military and state subsidies of the military-industrial sector can revitalize an economy. Part of me wonders if they actually envy Russia from the standpoint of their restructuring of the economy since 2022 into a wartime Keynesian state with central planning, which has provided a buffer for some of the economic ill effects that Russia might have incurred if it just sat back and accepted the sanctions regime that has been imposed on it. But they're now basically converting into a war economy, which does bolster overall economic output, just as happened with the United States in World War II. So there are some ingredients here that make me wonder if like we're in for like a really disturbing eventuality within the short term. I don't know how much grand strategic thinking is behind any of this, but you can see certain components maybe adding up to a pretty catastrophic endpoint.
There are incentives there, Michael. To your point, there are incentives. On November 14th, 2011, Trump tweeted, "Barack Obama will attack Iran in the not-too-distant future because it will help him win the election." So the way he thinks of it is, oh, rally around the flag effect, you do a war, your poll numbers go up. To your point, it revitalizes the economy in the sense that our welfare in this country is warfare, and you beef up the military-industrial complex and people get jobs in that industry. Mix that with the Israel lobby, Miriam Adelson, all these groups that gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars over his 2 runs, and they're telling him in his ear, yeah, we want to be able to annex the West Bank, we want to be able to annex Gaza, and Netanyahu saying we got to take out the Iranian government. Trump is surrounded by all of these incentives where what you just laid out is not only possible, but plausible.
Let me add one more layer to that, which is that, Michael, you were gesturing at the fact that the way Trump has gone about claiming some of these extraordinary and I would say unconstitutional powers is by claiming that we are effectively at war. Right. The Alien Enemies Act. Like, we're supposedly invaded by this Venezuelan gang that, best estimates are there's maybe 200 members of here. And, they're
supposedly invaded by the Venezuelan government.
Exactly.
Like, that's the basis for the invocation of that Alien Enemies Act. It's not just that the gang has come over the border. It's that the Venezuelan government is in concert with those gangs, thus justifying the declaration of a state of war with Venezuela itself.
Yeah, so you have that. There was a memorandum that required an analysis of whether the Insurrection Act should be invoked. That drops on April 20th. So you've got that. You obviously have, with regard to the tariffs, they're claiming that Trump can do this complete upending of our economic system and the global economic system, a power that's supposed to be reserved for Congress. They're supposed to be, power of the purse, in charge of raising revenue, et cetera. He's claiming those powers for himself, also under the auspices of national security. So, what could be more
emergency.
potent?
That's the actual, that's in the legislation that they're putatively invoking.
That they're using. Yeah. So what could be, a better justification for more power grabs, more authoritarian, actions and consolidation of power than an actual war? And, I think also with when you put all of these things together, the intentional crashing of the economy, which you're 100% correct about, put together with the crushing of dissent and the labeling of someone who hurts a Tesla as a domestic terrorist, and the potential of war, like, it also feels like not only are they trying to manufacture a recession, but that they're also trying to manufacture a real crisis, that would allow them to go even further in terms of, the way that Trump has just sucked up power this time around. And just, one last piece of that is you have to look at the total picture of, like, it's not just going after these students or even just going after immigrants. The way that he is and the universities are unfortunately going along with capitulating to his demands about how he wants them to run. So he's an assault on universities, an assault on media, an assault on these law firms. Now with the tariffs, an assault on industry where, every company has to come and beg for their little personal exceptions, et cetera. And you can see the way that he's going step by step to undermine any potential alternative power source in the country.
But Michael, when we got into the Iraq war, there was 2 years of relentless propaganda about Iraq and Saddam Hussein and 9/11, and they built up to it. And they lied, and Bush started the propaganda when he had a 90% approval rating after 9/11. For Trump to just, like you said, be like, yeah, I'm going to attack Iran in May if they don't come to the table, which, by the way, he ripped up a peace deal we already had with them, which was working, right? I can't imagine a world where he does that and his approval rating doesn't immediately tank to George W. Bush lows of like 26%. Can you?
I don't know. It just seems like Trump has a higher ceiling in his approval rating than previous presidents, or a lower floor. No, a higher floor. I should have said. A higher floor and maybe a lower ceiling. So it's hard to imagine it hovering like Trump's approval rating when he left office in 2021 was actually higher than Biden's turned out to be. After January 6th. So who knows? I mean, I always hesitate to predict the future. I guess it's possible. But you mentioned the Iraq war analogy. Bush at least said that he had to go to the United Nations and at least make an appeal for a UN Security Council resolution. Now, they didn't ultimately get it, and they determined that they were entitled to attack Iraq without getting China and Russia to sign on. But they at least went through the motions. And then they also went and got congressional approval. To the Democrats' discredit, most of the Senate Democrats voted to authorize the use of force in Iraq, including Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer, et cetera. So Trump is not even giving it the slightest indication that he would feel like he needs to be constrained by those institutional checks, whether within the U.S. political system or in the global system. Now, they're not talking about a ground invasion per se, which is what was always being effectively threatened with Iraq. But let's say that the United States and Israel, in some kind of combination, actually does cross the red line of attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, which is what Netanyahu has been dreaming of for 25 years or longer. Once they cross that red line, what's to stop just going all the way? What? So you're going to launch the bunker busting bombs on the underground Iranian nuclear facilities, cause a huge amount of turmoil, not just in Iran, but the entire region. Why not just then go full bore and impose the regime change that has been the ultimate ambition of Netanyahu in ginning up this threat constantly? I mean, Trump doesn't seem that hesitant about outsourcing Middle East policy to Netanyahu. In fact, in some ways, he's gone even further. Like, Netanyahu wasn't talking about a full takeover of the Gaza Strip until Trump came out and said that the United States is actually going to take it over. When his first big foreign policy pronouncement of the second administration, standing beside Netanyahu at a press conference. So yes, there are some like culminations of this Iran stuff that become more and more plausible once you breach certain sort of thresholds as to what the United States, in conjunction with Israel, is willing to do. Oh, and then by the way, Trump keeps saying he wants to end the Ukraine war, which in theory is a good aspiration. Like, I thought that the Biden administration policy where we're not going to engage at all with Russia at the senior level, we're just going to keep ramping up the intensity of the weapon systems that we provision to Ukraine and hope for the best. And if that ultimately results in the U.S. basically furnishing the armaments for Ukraine to launch a ground incursion to Russia, well, let's just, sit around and maybe hope that doesn't lead to any kind of nuclear cataclysm. That was a failed policy, in my view. So Trump says he wants to end it, but good luck ending the Ukraine war if you stoke some random cataclysm in the Middle East against Iran, which is one of Russia's, if not client states, but military partners. They've bolstered their military relations over the past several years. Iran furnishes, we're told, Shahed drones, or at least the technology for Shahed drones, to Russia, which has been one of their most central tactics against Ukraine. So what, Putin's just going to really enjoy the United States launching another pretextual invasion, or at least offensive, in the Middle East? That's going to give him assurance that he should go along with these U.S. entreaties for him to stop waging war in Ukraine? I don't see how that really adds up. So yes, there are some like downstream ramifications of this Iran obsession that I think could complicate even what they're saying they're trying to accomplish in other theaters.
Michael, I also wanted to get from you, there was a sense on the right that, Trump is putting these, the opposite of these America First people into key national security positions. Tulsi Gabbard at DNI. Pete Hegseth was supposed to have had this, total reformation of his previous warmongering views. And one of the things that I thought was really revealed in the whole Signal Gate situation is that is just none of these people are remotely opposed to just leveling an apartment building in Yemen for, and patting each other on the back, congratulating each other, even though the policy is going to accomplish literally nothing other than death and destruction, because Biden tried it relentlessly. I mean, the Saudis have been bombing Yemen for how long? And J.D. Vance raises these sort of stupid and kind of tepid concerns, but he's the only one in there that says anything other than just yes, bombs away, let's go, isn't this glorious? And like I said, if Pete Hegseth has had this total about face, he should have been in there I don't know, guys, Tulsi Gabbard is on the chain. There's all kinds of people in there who are supposedly, quote unquote, America first and some great break from the previous neocon era. Obviously, that was not the case.
Well, the organizer or the ringleader was Mike Waltz, who was literally Dick Cheney's counterterrorism aide. I'm sorry, I just don't believe that whatever rhetorical makeover they choose to go through, that Mike Waltz or Marco Rubio, for that matter, or Hegseth are just repudiating all their pre-existing beliefs. Rather, they know that there are some political imperatives at play for them to basically just modify their rhetorical posture on certain things. I mean, that was always what seemed obvious to me. With Tulsi Gabbard, it's slightly different. I mean, we've discussed her a lot over the years. I think I might have mentioned this maybe last time I was on the show, but when the first impeachment of Trump came up in December of 2019, she voted present. Mm-hmm. And I was inclined favorably toward that vote because I thought that the premise of the first Trump impeachment was highly dubious. It was claiming that Trump had thwarted official U.S. foreign policy by temporarily freezing arms to Ukraine, but then no arms actually failed to arrive to Ukraine. So it was just kind of much ado about nothing and an excuse for Democrats to like give some emotional gratification to their base who like wanted some official condemnation of Trump in like really grandiose terms.
Hey guys, sign up for Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack below if you want to see the longer conversation here. Michael Tracy goes into all different aspects of Trump's horrific neocon, bloodthirsty, warmongering foreign policy. Unfortunately, this is something that many people aren't talking about nearly enough, but they have grand plans, and they're horrible grand plans, and you're going to want to see this whole conversation. Sign up below.